challenging.
I remember some of the very few stories that I heard. One explanation was that it was consistent with what you said about your job was to find out where the enemy was, but there was something about that you would find out where the enemy was in relation to calling in airstrikes. That, like, I think one time you might have shown me a line of smoke in the jungle and said that's, that was essentially was an airstrike that you had called in. What was that? Was that something that you were doing? Was it just, were you finding out where the enemy was for combat missions or for air attacks, or both?
Well, both. The picture you're talking about was taken in a near a mountain, in one of the very few mountains in where I was. It was called Nui Koto. Nui meaning, I believe Nui means mountain. Nui Koto was a place where the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese used that mountain because it's high ground, you can see everything. They used that mountain as a drop-off point for a lot of supplies. That and I'll show you in a map later where the mountain is in an area close to a place called, that's referred to as the Parrot's Beak, that was in Cambodia, and it was aimed right at Saigon, and Saigon was obviously a big target, So, but anyway, that smoke that you were talking about came from an airstrike that intelligence got that information, and the smoke comes because it hit it hit ammunition that was on the ground. An ammo, as we say, an ammo dump, like that.
So it was the explosion from hitting the ammunition.
Yeah, and I just, one more thing, and I'll let you move on, but on the intelligence part of it, because this is pretty interesting stuff. I remember I used to, in the morning and the evening, we would, myself and other, like the G3, the G1, all that, the Vietnamese G2 and the G2 advisor would give a joint briefing. The Vietnamese officer would stand up and give his briefing to the colonel, the commanding officer, and then I would do the same thing to the American senior advisor. And we would give him the intelligence update. So anyway, went through a period of time where we had nothing to say because we couldn't find the enemy. It was almost embarrassing because that's your job, see. So anyway, every time after the briefing, I would get chewed out something terrible by the senior advisor, who was Mal Ombre,
yeah, we'll come to him.
Mal Ombre was a tough guy, see. But anyway, Mal Ombre would just chew me out because I wasn't doing my job. I wasn't finding the enemy. Anyway, so finally, after I'd been chewed out for about 3 or 4 days, I'm sitting with my counterpart, the G2, and he said, I said to him,
Vietnamese G2.
Vietnamese G2.
And he speaks English.
He speaks English. I said, what, I get chewed out every morning, and the Vietnamese, your commander doesn't chew you out. And he said, well, the reason he doesn't is because he understands that right now is harvest time in Vietnam. This is when all the rice and whatever else they had is harvested. And the VC, the Viet Cong, they have to do this just like, your farmers do back in the United States. When it's time to harvest the corn, everything stops. That's what they do. And the same thing here. They don't fight. They harvest because they have to eat. So they won't do this until another week or so. They'll get back to the war. And I shook my head in disbelief, and it just told me, that we really went over to fight a war that we didn't understand. I wasn't the only one that didn't understand this. My senior advisor, Mal Omri, he didn't understand it either. He didn't say that. But here we're just fighting a war that we were,
You were fighting, would you say you were trying to fight an American or European style war in an Asian?
Yeah, and we didn't know the history.
Setting.
We didn't know a lot of the basic things that, we just came unprepared. And at least in my view, I don't know how they could have prepared me, but anyway, I thought it said a whole bunch to me about fighting wars.